Hi, boys and girls. We're back again for another math lesson. Today we're going to talk a little bit about telling and writing time to the half hour and what that means. Now, in lessons before, earlier this week, we learned all about telling time to the hour. So we're going to learn what a half hour is and what it looks like. Let's take a look at our words to know.
Digital clock. A half hour is 30 minutes. How many minutes are there in an hour? There are 60 minutes in an hour.
This is something that we learned the other day in earlier lessons, that there are 60 minutes in an hour.
So half an hour is 30 minutes. Why is a half hour 30 minutes?
Well, let's think about it. And I want you to take a look at this clock right now. When we talked about lessons prior, we said 1 hour is 60 minutes, meaning that minute hand takes 60 minutes to go all the way around the clock one time. Now, today we're talking about a half hour, and I want you to think of the clock like a big circle. If I go around the circle one time, it'll be 1 hour, 60 minutes. But if I only want to go around the clock halfway, meaning cutting it right down the middle, I'm not going to go the full 60 minutes. I'm only going to go half of that. And if I take 60 and break it into two equal groups, it would be 30.
Where is the minute hand pointing?
Let's take a look here. Again, remembering that our minute hand is our long hand. So looking at the red arrow on the clock, it's pointing to what number?
The minute hand is on 6. What does this show? You can say it is 30 minutes or half past the hour.
All right, so this is now just a new word that we're adding into our vocabulary for math, and that is when it is not exactly a new hour, right? But it's in between, halfway through. So we can say that it is 30 minutes or half past the hour, meaning that that minute hand has gone in a half a circle around the clock.
Where is the hour hand?
Now, if you remember from our earlier lessons, the hour hand is that small hand, and in this case, it's the blue one. So looking here, you have to take a look and see where is the hour hand pointing. It's not like we saw last time where it was exactly on a number, where it was either at 2 or 3 or 4 or any of the numbers here. This time it looks like the hour hand is pointing somewhere different.
The hour hand is between 2 and 3. Think about why it points between those numbers. It takes the hour hand a whole hour to travel from one number to the next.
So, if talking about time and talking about 1 whole hour, if my clock started at 2 o'clock and I waited the whole 60 minutes, meaning my red hand went all the way around, it would take that 60 minutes to go from the 2 to the 3. Now, when I don't go the full way around the clock and I only go halfway, you can see that that hour hand is working towards the number 3 to almost be 3 o'clock, but it's not quite there yet. It's in between those two numbers.
After a half hour, the hour hand has traveled halfway to the 3.
That's why it's in between 2 and 3. Not quite 2, not quite 3.
Compare the two kinds of clocks.
So now looking here, we have our analog clock, which is the one that we have in our classroom. And then the one you might be a little bit more familiar with is our digital clock. It wants us to compare the two clocks. Now we said that these clocks are, in earlier lessons, we said that these clocks definitely do not look the same, right? Because our analog clock has hands to help us tell the time, whereas our digital clock is just numbers.
The minute hand points to the 6. What numbers show minutes on the digital clock?
Well, if this analog clock here says that the hour is in between 2 and 3, and it's at the 6, which we just learned is a half hour, we would say that the time is 2:30 on this analog clock. Now, knowing that this clock says 2:30 and looking at this digital clock over here, I want you to make a prediction as to what numbers show minutes on the digital clock. If you remember the digital clock, we read it saying the hour first and then the minutes. So what numbers show the minutes on the digital clock? Well, it's going to be the two numbers after the two dots.
The number after the dots shows minutes. The digital clock shows 30 minutes. What time do both clocks show?
So taking a look here, we see that the hour on the digital clock is 2 and the minutes is 30. So we would read that as 2:30. And our analog clock, we said our hour hand is in between 2 and 3. Not quite 2, well, it's a little bit past 2, but not quite 3. And our minute hand is at the 6, which we now know is half past the hour, or also known as a half hour or 30 minutes. So both clocks show the same time in two different ways. They both show that the time is 2:30.
It is 2:30 or 2:30. Now you know how to tell the time to the half hour on two kinds of clocks.
Hi, boys and girls. So we're not done just yet for today. I do want to talk you through a couple more examples just so that you can understand this a little bit better. I know that time to the half hour can be a little tricky, so I wanted to provide you guys with a couple more examples. Let's go right into it. Let's review some of the vocabulary that we talked about in our video today. So we already know from earlier lessons that 1 hour is 60 minutes. That means the big hand points to that 12 on an analog clock, and we say that that is o'clock. So looking at this example here, and let me just get my pointer so that you can see what I'm talking about. When you're looking at these two examples, we see that the hour hand is pointing to the 4 and the minute hand is pointing to the 12, so the time is 4 o'clock. Now today what we learned new is something called a half hour. And a half hour is 30 minutes, which is what you see happening here on this clock. We know that when the minute hand is on the 12, as we saw in the earlier example, that means it's a new hour, 4 o'clock. However, if that red minute hand is pointing to the 6, it's only going halfway around the clock. It's not going the full 60 minutes. It's going half of that, which would be 30, which is why we see the red minute hand on the 6. We call this a half hour. And anytime that you see the 6, we know that it is 30 minutes or half past the hour. So in this case, it would be 2:30 being shown on this clock. Let's see a couple of examples. So looking at number 1, we're looking at this blue clock here. The first thing you always do is look at the blue hour hand on the clock. Now it's in between the 7 and the 8. So it's not quite 8 o'clock yet. It's getting close to it, but it's not quite there yet. So it's still within the 7 o'clock hour. So we know that our hour hand is in between 7 and 8, as we see here. However, the minute hand is on the 6. And we just learned anytime we see our big red minute hand on the 6, that means it's been a half hour. It's traveled halfway around the clock, or 30 minutes. So this example, the clock is showing 7:30 as the time. Let's take a look at another example. The hour hand in this orange clock, looking at the blue hour hand, it's in between the 4 and the 5. So it's not quite 5 o'clock yet. It's still within the 4 o'clock hour. So I'm going to switch this over to my pen to write this in. The hour hand is between 4 and 5. Now we have to look at the red minute hand. The red minute hand is on the 6. We know that when it lands on the 6, that means it has been a half hour. So I'm still within the 4 o'clock hour, but I'm 30 minutes in. So the time is 4:30 on this clock. Let's try a few more examples. It says to rate the time shown on each clock. So every time you look at a clock, the first thing you want to look at is the short hand, our hour hand. And in this case, it's in between 8 and 9. Not quite 9 o'clock yet, so it's still within the 8 o'clock hour. So I'm going to write that in on my digital clock, that the hour is 8. Now, my red minute hand, again, it's on that 6. Anytime it's on the 6, that means it's been a half hour or 30 minutes. So the time on this clock is 8:30. Let's try another example. Looking at the blue clock here, we look at the hour hand first always, and this time it's in between the 5 and the 6. So not quite 6 o'clock, it's still within the 5 o'clock hour. So my hour is still 5. However, we need to still look at my minute hand, and my minute hand is again at the 6. When the minute hand is at the 6, that means it's gone halfway around the clock, or a half hour. So we know that that is 30 minutes. So the time on this clock is 5:30. Let's try another example where we're going to be looking for patterns. We've done this a few days prior where we had to find the pattern. So let's take a look here. The first time shown is 6 o'clock, and then it jumps a half hour to 6:30. That means that that minute hand has gone halfway around the clock. However, the next number in the pattern is 7 o'clock. So it went from 6 o'clock to a half hour, 6:30, then another half hour to 7 o'clock. Now we need to figure out what number is missing, what time is missing to continue our pattern. Well, the number after our blank is 8 o'clock. So I need to figure out what is halfway in between 7 and 8. Well, I just learned today that halfway in between would be 7:30, meaning a half hour has passed. Let's continue. We were at 7:30, then it goes to 8 o'clock. Then after 8 o'clock, we need to go a half hour into the 8 o'clock hour. So it's still within the 8 o'clock hour, but I still need to go a half hour to continue my pattern. So it's not just going to be 8, it's going to be 8:30. And last but not least, our last number in the pattern. Let's start from the beginning so that we can keep our pattern in mind. 6 o'clock, 6:30, 7 o'clock, 7:30, 8 o'clock, 8:30. Well, if you're thinking about the numbers on the clock, they go in order from 1 all the way to 12. And I was in the 8 o'clock hour. So what number comes after 8, boys and girls? It's going to be the number 9. So I am into the new hour of 9 o'clock. And that completes our pattern, going a half hour every time. Another example is a word problem, and it says, Sandy, let me go back to my pointer. Sandy walked her dog at 3 o'clock. She walked for 30 minutes. What time did she get home? Draw the clock hands and write the time. All right, so going back to my pen, we know that she started to walk her dog at 3 o'clock. If you think about 3 o'clock, on an analog clock, that would mean my minute hand is pointing to the 12. However, it says that she walked her dog for 30 minutes. That means I'm not going to end at 3 o'clock. I need to go 30 minutes past or half past 3 o'clock. So my question asks, what time did she get home? Well, half past 3 o'clock would be 3:30. So to draw my hands, and I'm going to try my best here, even though it's a little difficult on my computer, I'm going to show that I'm not at 3 o'clock anymore, but my hour hand is in between the 3 and the 4. And she walked for 30 minutes, so that means half past, meaning my long minute hand has gone halfway around the clock all the way to my 6. Now my time on this clock shows 3:30. So that is how long she walked. That's the time that she got home. Now I can write that digitally as well. The hour is still 3, and half past 3 o'clock we know is a half hour or 30 minutes. So I write the numbers 3 and 30. And that is the end of our little mini lesson for today. I just wanted to say, keep working hard, boys and girls. I'm so proud of you. I know that this time is really difficult, especially to be learning new material and not getting to be with you to answer all your questions. But if you do have any questions, just have your parents send me a message. I am more than happy to help. I hope you are all staying safe and healthy, and I will see you next time.